So let's take a look at how some streets came about. So the naming of Pearl Street. Dr. Cook, a government surveyor, came to Sioux City in the winter of 1854-1855. He laid out the original Sioux City on the west side of Perry Creek because it was the land he could get at the time. In the spring of 1855, he was able to obtain from Joseph Lyonnais what would become downtown. Now, Joseph Lyonnais' land stretched from Perry Creek to what would become Jones Street. On the north was 7th Street, and on the south was the Missouri River. It was on this plat in the spring of 1855 that Pearl Street was first named. So, you may be familiar with a couple of myths about the naming of Pearl Street. Pearl Street was named for a madam or a prostitute or a cook on a passing Missouri River steamboat. Well, let's debunk myth number 2. Steamboat companies rarely carried single women prior to the 1850s, and very rarely had women crew members. Having such women crew members could result in animosity among other crew members, and as a general practice, steamboat captains prohibited the prostitutes for steamboat travel. And more specifically, I've heard a myth that Pearl Street was named for a female cook on the steamboat Omaha. Well, that's all well and good, except as we discussed, Sioux City was named in the spring of 1855. The Omaha was built in the fall of 1855, and its maiden voyage was to Sioux City in the summer of 1856. So the boat didn't exist when Pearl Street was named. Looking at more plausible explanations, Gertrude Henderson, a writer, librarian, and later curator of the Sioux City Public Museum, wrote in a 1925 article that Dr. Cook had named Pearl Street after Pearl Street in New York, which was named for the pearls found in the rich oyster beds of the East River. Interestingly, in New York, Pearl Street, as you travel south, turns into Water Street and then ends at Battery Park. I don't think it's much of a coincidence to think that both Water Street and Pearl Street in downtown were named because of this. Now, other alternative, John Cook, before he came to Sioux City, lived in St. Louis. There was a commercial district in North St. Louis that was called, it was a commercial district called the Pearl District, and Cook would have known that well. Sorry if you really like those myths. So, let's look at really the history of Pearl Street and how it initially comes to be Sioux City's main street. The text you see here is from an 1890 history of Woodbury and Plymouth counties. There being no means of transportation other than wagons, Mr. Jackson journeyed to St. Louis in June of 1856, where he chartered the steamboat Omaha. He stocked the boat with cargo valued at $70,000, consisting of a sawmill, lumber, furniture, dry goods, hardware, etc. When the Omaha landed at the wild banks of the turbulent Missouri, there were only 2 houses to greet the pilot. There, Milton Tootle and James Jackson business was a success. And they had a frame store built in St. Louis and brought in sections, and this was the first store in the embryo city. It was a pre-built building in St. Louis and erected here. That is correct. So here is the arrival of the steamboat Omaha as depicted by Gary Lucy. This is June of 1856. And we see the first store of Sioux City, the Tootle and Jackson store. They built Sioux City's first general store. It was located at the northeast corner of 2nd and Pearl Street, dating back to 1856. We're going to look at a lot of other merchants on Pearl Street as it developed as Sioux City's primary commercial district in our city's earliest days. George Schuster and Fred Buckrucker started a grocery store in 1857. You can see it depicted here. It was Sioux City's first brick building. Brick manufacturing had begun in Sioux City and Sergeant Bluff simultaneously in the late 1850s. This was located at number 12 or 221 Pearl Street. I may as well start now. Prior to 1883, Pearl Street didn't have the same numbering system we have today. It basically started at 2nd Street, and it went 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. It just continued up the street. So instead of having, say, for instance, 301 Pearl Street, that was actually number 25 Pearl Street. And going all the way up as far north as, say, 512 Pearl, that was 82 Pearl Street. So that's why there are 2 addresses on most of these slides. Pearl Street emerged quickly. Business flourished there. This is about 8 years later, Pearl Street looking north from 2nd Street in 1864. We can see a whole lot of things would really change on Pearl Street from the 1860s to the 1870s, other than many of the wood frame buildings that you see here now were slowly being replaced by brick structures. William Faulkner and Company, he at 210 Pearl, he purchased the business of Bernard and Eisman, which had opened in 1857. That dry goods business was sold in September of 1865 and is depicted here. Francis Bellinger's Eating House, 1866, at number 22 or 300 Pearl Street. We can see little has changed from this Byron Guernsey photo of 1866, Pearl Street looking north from 2nd Street. Charles Breun opened his shoe business here in Sioux City at number 55 Pearl in 1866. This is today 407 Pearl Street. Breun would be a longtime Pearl Street merchant. He transitioned from shoes to groceries in 1871. His business was around until 1914. Sometime in the 1890s, he began roasting his coffee. His retail store took on wholesale proportions, and he distributed goods throughout Sioux City's trade territory in northern Nebraska, in the Dakotas, Montana, and Wyoming. Lawrence McCarty was also a grocer here in Sioux City as far back as 1867. Now, McCarty's store was originally located on the west side of Pearl Street between 4th and 5th. By the late 1870s, he had moved to 601 Pearl Street. His business and residence there were the heart of Sioux City's Irish community, dubbed Little Dublin. James A. Sawyer built Sioux City's first 3-story building in 1867 at the northwest corner of 2nd and Pearl Street, 201 to 203. Now a little bit about James Sawyer and his business partner, Edwin Ruthven Kirk. They were brothers-in-law and started their mercantile business in Sioux City in 1857. Sawyer had come to Sioux City in 57. He was later commander of the Iowa Border Brigade during the American Civil War. He was heavily engaged in transportation infrastructure. He owned 2 steamboats and a ferry which crossed the Missouri River here at Sioux City, connecting Sioux City and Covington, or later South Sioux. He also helped build a wagon road to the Montana goldfields and helped promote that road as well. His business partner and brother-in-law, Edwin Ruthven Kirk, came to Sioux City also in 1857. It was interesting, I did not know this about Kirk. He had attempted to join John Brown's militia in Kansas, which was trying to prevent pro-slavery Missourians from ransacking towns in Kansas. Kirk served in many political positions here in Sioux City, and notably as a sutler or a storekeeper during the Civil War, when Sioux City was an outfitting post for expeditions into the Dakotas. As far back as 1857, August Groninger sold hardware here in Sioux City. Here is an image of his new brick building, which he built in February of 1868 at 212 Pearl. We're going to see this building pop up again. H.D. Bogue, the wholesale grocer, his business located in the new Masonic block, which he built in 1868 as well, at number 23 or 301 Pearl Street. This is the business building in which meatpacking magnate James Bogue, who was H.D. Bogue's brother, started his hog slaughtering business. T.J. Kincaid's new block and E.B. Crawford Merchant Tailor. The image is incorrect. It was incorrectly published. This was at 213 Pearl Street. It was built in March of 1868. Do you know what else happened in March of 1868? The arrival of the first train in Sioux City, the 9th of March, 1868. This would forever change the course of Sioux City history and the course of Pearl Street's history. As long as the river dictated Sioux City's commerce, Pearl Street was likely to remain Sioux City's main street. But we'll see that will change in the future. This is Sioux City's levee looking to the southeast from Sawyer's Block around 1869. With the arrival of the railroad here, Sioux City was the northernmost point on the Missouri River, which had a rail connection. That meant that for about 4 years until 1873, Sioux City became the steamboat capital of the upper Missouri, really of the entire Missouri, because most places south had a good rail connection.
Where was the Sawyer Block?
Sawyer Block was at the northwest corner of 2nd and Pearl. You're welcome. This is an image taken from that Sawyer Block looking to the northeast in about 1869. Not in about 1869. We can verify the date or the year of this photo because of what's being built in the background. You can see August Groninger's hardware store there in the center, and you're starting to see a handful more brick buildings being built up the stretch of Pearl Street. Tootle and Charles, which was the successor of the Tootle and Jackson store, built a new building in the summer of 1868 in the same location as the former building. There we have John Hare Charles, who was the local manager of this business. Weare and Allison. George Weare was Sioux City's pioneer banker. He came to Sioux City in 1855 and partnered with J.P. Allison. They built this new structure at 223 Pearl Street between 1869 and 1870. Daniel Hartnett and John Hornick partnered in business with their billiard hall, probably located at 217 Pearl Street. From 1869 to 1872, this billiard hall offered free weekly lunches. Now, Hartnett was an accomplished hunter, and bison was often on the menu. George W. Felt was another grocer here in Sioux City, located at number 45 Pearl, which would be on the west side of Pearl Street, just a little bit south of 4th Street. His business started here in 1870. George Felt would later acquire a business partner by the name of T.S. Martin, and that would start in a whole dry goods business, which would eventually become the T.S. Martin Company, which was a large department store here in Sioux City. We're getting bigger buildings. The Union Block was built in the fall of 1871 between 54 and 60 Pearl, today 404 and 410 Pearl. Now, this building was built because a fire on the 16th of July, 1871 had destroyed the entire half block of the east side of Pearl Street between 4th and 5th. That happened to be the third major fire of the year. The damage from that blaze was around $27,000. Now, this photo, circa 1875, we can see the 4 businesses located here, including Alder and Catherine's, M.C. Bogue and Company, G. Falkenhainer, and O.C. Mall. T.G. Cowgill would purchase the business of O.C. Mall in September of 1874. This is an image out of a Sioux City directory. Much farther up the street was the Washington House Hotel at number 82 or 512 Pearl Street. John Schlupp opened this hotel in 1873, and it remained a hotel until 1932. This is today on the site of the United States Federal Building. In 1874, another pioneer banker, T.J. Stone, proposed the construction of a building on Pearl Street to be rented to the county for use as a county courthouse. He would lease it back to the county for $2,000 a year. Now, George Weare and J.P. Allison, Sioux City's other bankers, had proposed construction of a similar building for $4,000 a month. The editorial board of the Sioux City Journal didn't like either and thought that Sioux City deserved its own independent courthouse, which would be built about 4 years later and several blocks away. A couple of new buildings are popping up on Pearl Street. Here you can see the Davis and Wan Company building. That would be on the left, built in 1877. And William Hiles Tower Jewelry, no surprise in the name there, was built in 1878. Now, A.C. Davis and J.W. Wan had started their farm machinery business this same year and moved into that structure built by August Groninger. William Hiles had opened a jewelry store in Sioux City in 1870. He and Captain M.W. Murphy built this new storefront in April of 1878. That's the building on the right with the tower. Weare and Allison, after only a couple of years in their earlier location at 221 Pearl, built a new structure at number 405 Pearl Street. It opened in 1878. And there is George Weare on the left and J.P. Allison on the right. So what happened? After the arrival of the railroad and certain real estate speculators got involved on 4th Street, with the railroad coming into town along the 2nd Street right-of-way, warehouses began to develop along 3rd Street, and retail businesses started to locate on the east-west portions of 4th Street. Also, real estate speculators built new brick buildings along 4th Street, speculative buildings, and it became the new and primary center of Sioux City's commercial district. It was at this time that Pearl Street began to lose a little bit of its status. Here are a couple of those new buildings built on 4th Street: the Hubbard House Hotel at the northeast corner of 4th and Pierce, and the Academy of Music Hall on the south side of 4th Street between Pierce and Douglas. Now, this isn't altogether bad news, because Pearl Street would emerge as Sioux City's wholesaling center. And wholesaling was a major industry for Sioux City, especially after the Panic of 1893 and as we move into the early 20th century. So again, that's not necessarily a bad deal. The Odyssey of William Tackaberry, 1878 to 1882. I had such great fun putting these series of slides together. William Tackaberry, Robert Van Kuren, and John Floyd moved their wholesale business to Sioux City in 1878 from Keokuk, Iowa. They began renting space from August Groninger in his old warehouse at 212 Pearl Street. That building, and almost every building at the southeast corner of 3rd and Pearl, burned on the evening of March 26th into 27th in 1880. Within 4 days, what you can see also depicted here was a temporary warehouse built on the ruins of the old. A new permanent structure was already under construction within a few weeks at the northeast corner of 3rd and Pearl Street. This is Tackaberry's new building at 300 to 302 Pearl Street, which opened in October of 1880. Continuing the Odyssey, Tackaberry & Son forms in 1882 and move into this building. Now, William Tackaberry left a partnership with Van Kuren and Floyd, and he partnered with his son, William E. Tackaberry, in this new firm. The new wholesale grocery business moved in to this brand new warehouse built by Ed Courtwright. E.C. Palmer & Company, another wholesaler, opened in Sioux City in February of 1879. Edward Palmer had come to Sioux City from St. Joseph, Missouri. St. Joseph, Michigan. He was traveling all over the West trying to find a place to locate his new wholesale house. He came down to Sioux City or Kansas City, and of course Palmer opted for Sioux City. Hence, he's in our presentation today. John Hornick. We've already heard his name before in partnership with Daniel Hartnett. Hornick had come to Sioux City in 1867, partnered with Hartnett in the billiard business, before entering the freighting business with Fred T. Evans. In 1880, Hornick ventured on his own in the wholesale drug business. This building, depicted here, was located at 3rd and Pearl up until the 1980s. It was one of the largest wholesale drug companies in the United States and the largest in Iowa. Samuel H. Dillon came to Sioux City in 1881 and located at 210 Pearl Street. He opened one of Sioux City's earliest bottling works, the Sioux City Bottling Works. That is one of his bottles. The Strange Brothers, Hides and Furs, located to Sioux City in 1882 at 308 to 310 Pearl. During the Black Hills Gold Rush of the late 1870s, Fred Strange was there, began buying pelts and sending them back to Sioux City. He was joined in business by his brothers, Walter and Joseph, in that business, and they had a long history here. Strange Brothers existed until 1999. Fighting fires was difficult once upon a time when there are no water mains, when your fire department has to depend on downtown cisterns for pumping water. In 1884 and 1885, the Sioux City Municipal Water Works was formed, which built the reservoirs in Grandview Park, put in water mains and sewer lines under downtown city streets. This is a great J.H. Hamilton photograph of the installation of water mains on Pearl Street in 1884. This image is taken from just south of 3rd Street. This is, of course, a stereo view, so each side is equal. The 3-story building kind of in the center background is the John Hornick Wholesale Grocery Company. Tolerton and Stetson forms in 1885. Now in 1882, the E.C. Palmer Wholesale Grocery Company moved from its location at 301 Pearl Street to this new building at 201 Pearl Street. In 1885, George and A.L. Stetson purchased the interest in that business and reorganized it as the Tolerton and Stetson Company, the forerunner of Tolerton and Warfield, which was a longtime Sioux City business until 1956. Joseph Marks was a wholesale alcohol and grocer. His business started in Sioux City around 1863. Early on, his business was located in the Union Block, which we've already seen, at number 60 Pearl Street. He moved a couple of times until landing in this building in 1886. One of the best little one-liners about Joseph Marks was recorded from Joseph Lyonnaise, in which Joseph Lyonnaise said, "Have any good whiskey?" to Paul Paquette, he said this. And Paquette answered, "Not very bad, not very good. I drink it myself. Don't kill me, won't kill you. Buy it from Joseph Marks for $3 a gallon." Mueller and Nepper Saddlery moved into this building in 1886. They purchased the saddlery business of J.M. McConnell back in 1883, and this new factory went up in 1886. Fred Bard's eventually took over the business in 1888. It is depicted here as Bard's Company. Hattenbach and McGee Grocers at 307 Pearl Street, depicted here in about 1887. The Hattenbach Story. Godfrey and Frances Hattenbach immigrated to the United States from Germany at the end of the 1830s. After voyaging up the Missouri River in the 1850s, they and their children settled in Omaha, Nebraska Territory near present-day Homer. Shortly thereafter, they moved to Covington, Nebraska Territory, which is today the northern part of South Sioux City. There, the Hattenbachs built a hotel in 1856. That hotel was washed away in a Missouri River flood of 1857. That flood also destroyed the town of Omaha. They crossed the river and became Sioux City's first Jewish family. However, the threat of Indian attack, as it was written, drove the Hattenbachs back to Cincinnati. But the spirit of the West was too strong, and they returned to Sioux City in 1869. Upon returning to Sioux City in 1869, Godfrey's eldest sons, Ludwig and Nathan, opened a cigar factory on Pearl Street. In the early 1880s, Ludwig partnered with D.A. McGee in the grocery business under the name Hattenbach and McGee. On the top, you can see an advertisement for Hattenbach and McGee groceries, tobaccos, and cigars. That business was located at number 29 to 31 or 307, 309 Pearl Street. Now, D.A. McGee fell in love with Godfrey's daughter, Adelia Hattenbach. McGee converted, a Catholic, converted to Judaism so he could marry her. They lived out their lives happily in Sioux City for many more decades. Knapp and Spaulding Company moved to Sioux City in 1887. Clarence Knapp and Edwin Spaulding founded Knapp and Spaulding in Oskaloosa, Iowa in 85. Seeking a larger field of business, they moved here in 1887 and located in this building at 212 to 216 Pearl Street. We've come a long way. This is an image of Pearl Street looking to the north from 4th Street in 1889. We can see Pearl Street is still a prominent, bustling street, but there are a couple buildings here we haven't seen before. So let's take a look. On the left side of the screen, you can see McElhaney's Hall, as depicted here in 1891. It was located at 401 to 403 Pearl Street and built in 1870. Now, McElhaney had been in Sioux City for some time, back to the 1860s, but his great ambition for Sioux City was to have an excellent theater space. When his building was completed, which had retail and office space, the 3rd floor was dedicated for theater and as an assembly hall. The first production put on there was Uncle Tom's Cabin, held on Christmas Eve of 1870. I wanted to take a little bit closer look at that picture part of that picture I just showed, because we've got some really great stuff going on in the background. Now here in this image we can see Weare and Allison Bank. That's the one-story building there on the left. You can see Charles Breun's grocery store, which he had built in 1883, and the Purslow block, which is the one that says Cash Department Store in this image. And that was built in 1877. So just a little bit about Robert Purslow. Purslow had been a hardware and implement dealer here. He owned a lot of building lots and built a lot of buildings in Sioux City in the 1870s and 1880s. He announced construction of the building seen here in February of 1877. Now here's your great bit of Sioux City history and trivia. This building is still standing, although it looks significantly different, and it is likely downtown Sioux City's oldest standing building. Today it is a yoga studio. It used to be SOVAC and the Army Navy surplus store, for perspective. Across the street from McElhaney's Hall was the Davis block at 400 Pearl Street, built in 1870 by S.T. Davis. Now Davis is a prominent Sioux City figure. He came here in 1856. He was integral to Sioux City's development. He assisted Cook in various business interests, and including building the Davis block. He was largely responsible for obtaining railroad connections to Sioux City, not only the original Sioux City and Pacific, but also for lines that went off into the Dakotas. He also started the Sioux City Journal in 1864. Now here's my bit of digression and your other good little bits of Sioux City trivia. Several of Sioux City's west side streets are named for Davis's family. His sons, George and Ross and John Allen. His wife, his second wife, was Rebecca. His sister was Ida Isabella. These are some of Sioux City's west side streets named for the relations of S.T. Davis. Another kind of streetscape, this is the 4th Street looking east from Pearl. So there on the left, you can see the Davis block and this great Gothic building on the other corner, built by Allen Vinton at the southeast corner of 4th and Pearl Street in 1875. H.A. Lyon had been in the gunsmithing business in Sioux City since 1868. He originally had partnered with R.W. Soper, but this partnership dissolved shortly after it had formed. But Lyon continued in the gunsmithing business at 66 Pearl Street, later 416 Pearl Street, for many, many more decades. On February 8th of 1891, a disastrous fire leveled Lyon's gun store. That same year, he built the building you see here, which housed his shop and a hotel above. The same day that the Lyon gun store burned, February 8th, This happened, the Baker, Bissel, and Tolerton Stetson fire. We're again at the northwest corner of 2nd and Pearl Street. Tolerton and Stetson Wholesale Grocery occupied the Sawyer's block starting in '85. They had added on to the structure both on the left and right side. They had also added the 4th floor to this building. They leased part of the structure to Baker and Bissel. That fire and the H.A. Lyon fire took place on the same day and overwhelmed Sioux City's new professional firefighting force, which began in 1888. Tolerton and Stetson would rebuild on that site, however. After that catastrophic fire, A.L. Stetson traveled to Boston, met with members of the Northern Investment Company, which was a $6 million corporation that owned like a lot of the really good real estate, both commercial and industrial land in Sioux City. They wanted to secure funding to rebuild their structure. Representatives in Boston of this investment company agreed, and construction of what the Sioux City Journal called, when completed, it will be the largest wholesale house in Iowa and larger than any other grocery house on the Missouri River north of Kansas City. The Tolerton and Stetson Company. Tobin and Wilson came to Sioux City in 1890. They were located at 617 Pearl Street. Frank T. Wilson moved his carriage works here from Dakota Territory in 1890. The business thrived in its new home on Pearl Street. Wilson Trailer Company, as it would later be known, would later move to Water Street in the 19-teens. I want to move a little bit up Pearl Street. We've been kind of focusing on the downtown area, but just showing that Pearl Street was still a prominent place to have a business and to live. We see houses on Upper Pearl Street, including George Weare, who built his mansion at 705 Pearl Street in 1869. Ed Courtwright, we talked just a little bit about him and his construction projects. He built this house at 612 Pearl Street in 1881. This was later owned by Allen Vinton, who we've also heard just a little bit about in this talk. Whitfield Stinson, who had a lumber and coal company here in Sioux City dating many decades prior, built this house at 702 Pearl Street in 1885. This is the grading of Pearl Street and shows several other houses. Now, Sioux City, if you think Sioux City is hilly today, you should have been here 140 years ago. Massive parts of Sioux City, hills were cut down and valleys filled in. Here we're seeing just a little bit of grading, street grading going on Pearl Street in the 1300 block in 1886. The houses in the background are that of William Cody, William Brown, Alonzo L. d'Orsay, Charles Ruggles, Joseph Hallam, and Edward Jordan. Edward Jordan is the house on the right. That's right at the corner of 14th and Pearl. R.N. Mugen built this house in 1887 at 1207 Pearl Street. Edwin Donaldson built in the new Rose Hill addition at 1415 Pearl Street, 1887. H.C. Mall built this house at 1423 Pearl Street in 1889. T.P. Gear, Thomas Park Gear, who had started the Sioux City Linseed Oil Works, built this residence at 1509 Pearl Street in 1889. Ransom Chase built this very large structure at 1529 Pearl Street in 1890. That was followed by the Horace M. Marvin House at 1705 Pearl Street, built in 1890. This home would later be the residence of Gordon Badgerow. The Charles DeMun House was built at 417 Pearl Street in 1891. And Charles Breun, our longtime downtown merchant on Pearl Street, built this house in 1891 at 1431 Pearl Street. Now, there is a notorious reputation for Pearl Street. I imagine many of you may have all know that, so I really don't need to allude to it too much. Here we go. Prostitution in Sioux City, the short version. After the arrival of the railroad, Sioux City became a major steamboat port. We're looking at the era roughly between 1868 and 1884. At that time, prostitution was largely confined to a couple of areas. One, Hell's Half Acre at the bottom of Prospect Hill, which you can see there on the left. The second one, a little difficult to see, It's at 2nd and Douglas Street, and the brothel of Madam Shaw, who came to Sioux City in 1872 and was Sioux City's most notorious madam. Now, prostitution as a crime didn't exist in Sioux City. It was not illegal until 1882. And no statistics were kept on prostitution or bawdy houses until 1885. What happened? In 1884, A.S. Garrettson's Union Terminal Warehouse Company purchased the Maple Grove building and evicted the tenants. He was doing this for the construction of railroad facilities. Similarly, Stinson and Wells, who were coal dealers, and Fletcher and Case, who had a planing mill, tore down and built over what had been Hell's Half Acre. The Sioux City brothels crossed the river to that notorious little suburb of Covington, Nebraska. As a note, from Sioux City's founding in the winter of 1854 to 1893, there is no evidence to suggest that Pearl Street was a major center for prostitution. That would change. Economic depression and Pearl Street notoriety. The loss of Pearl Street's status as Sioux City's primary business street, coupled with the economic depression that followed the Panic of 1893, led to the abandonment of several buildings. Now, those empty buildings were quickly filled by houses of ill fame between 1893 and 1905. According to the 1900 U.S. Census, these 3 are Sioux City's biggest houses of ill repute. We have Mary Burke's at 310 Pearl Street. There were 12 women working there. Elizabeth Hovey and Edith Roger had 18 women at 301 Pearl Street, and Letty Caulfield at 319 Pearl Street had 12 women workers. So, the part of the myth is true. Was Pearl Street named for a madam or prostitute? No. Could there have been a Pearl on a woman named Pearl Street working the street named for it? Yes, quite possible. I know there's a lot of text here. I will summarize the sad story of Nellie Patten. Nellie Patten was born in the 1870s in Nebraska. She married at age 15 to Oliver Patten. They moved to Sioux City in 1887, but separated in 1891. Her original name was Constance Roosh. Nellie Patten Nellie Brookman was the name she took when she started working for Nellie Need's House of Ill Fame. The house, as the journal said, was this notorious house of ill fame on Pearl Street. It had only been on Pearl Street for about 2 weeks when this incident happened because it had been on Jones Street for about 4 years. She fell in love with William Royce. They lived together as a married couple, kind of. She didn't give up her trade. She was gone nights, gone for days at a time, and even weeks at a time. On November 24th, 1895, William had enough. He rented a gun from H.A. Lyon, drank a bottle of whiskey, broke into Nellie Need's House of Ill Fame, and twice shot Nellie Patten. She died. He then turned the gun on Nellie's madam, who was Nellie Need, and Rose McMullen. He pulled the trigger, but the gun refused to do Royce's bidding. He ran away and turned himself into the Sioux City Police Station only minutes later because it was only a couple of blocks away. The sad story continues. At Nellie Patten's funeral, there were many attendees. It was held at Westcott's Undertaking Parlor on the 26th of November. Again, a large crowd, but no priests there to speak. So there was really no service, just a lot of attendees. Those present were mostly Nellie's former co-workers. Her madam, Nellie Need, and her fellow co-workers paid all the expenses for the funeral, and Nellie Patten was buried at Floyd Cemetery on the 27th of November, 1895. We're going to kind of continue on just a little bit with some businesses. Even though Pearl Street has this notorious name, we're going to keep on going and add a couple new businesses. The Tom Malone grocery store opened in 1882. This Richardsonian Romanesque structure was put up in 1899 at 501 Pearl. International Harvester, a large wholesaler, built this building at the southeast corner of 2nd and Pearl Street in 1899. The Powers Building at 314 Pearl Street was built in 1903. This structure replaced the former Ed Courtright building, which had also been home to the William Tackaberry Company, and at the time of its burning in 1896 was the Malabar Manufacturing Company. At the time it opened, this structure in 1903 was occupied by Orkin and Levitt Clothing Company. The Cemansky Building at 509-511 Pearl Street was also designed by George W. Burkhead and built in 1904. The Hagan Block at 508 to 510 Pearl Street was built in 1905. The Akron Milling Company, which had started in 1902, moved to Sioux City in 1907 and built this mill at the southwest corner of 2nd and Pearl Street. The Hamilton Laundry Company opened in 1909 in this new building at 613, 615 Pearl Street. The Great White Way, 1910 to 1914. In 1910, Chesterman Company bought the former Weare and Allison Bank. They remodeled it, adding a second floor and putting on a new facade of white glazed brick. This started a movement for the next 4 years known as the Great White Way, which reclad several buildings along Pearl Street in a similar white glazed brick in an effort to clean up this old neighborhood and kind of gloss over some of the notorious past. You can see a much later photo from 1947, Met's Bakery, when it was located on Pearl Street in the former Union Block, that it had a new white facade, and there are several buildings on Pearl Street that still have this white facade just like this. The E.H. Stone, the son of pioneer banker T.J. Stone, built this structure at 421, 425 Pearl Street in 1911. It was first occupied by the Marshall Brothers Cigar Company and wholesaler G.H. Jenkinson. Headington and Heddenberg, which had started in 1905, built this new warehouse at 200 to 202 Pearl Street. And finally, in 1914, Palmer Fruit Company built this structure at 208 to 210 Pearl Street. Now we're in 1914, where this program ends, when the northern part of Pearl Street was renamed Grandview. By 1914, some of the women living on Upper Pearl Street perceived the name of their street as just too notorious to bear. They started a signing campaign to rename the street. Many signed the petition to rename Pearl Street Grandview Avenue. Gordon Badgerow, who lived at 1205 Pearl Street, submitted the petition to the City Council, and the City Council agreed. So Ordinance H 6300 passed the 4th of April, 1914, changed the name of Pearl Street north of Perry Creek to Grandview Boulevard, and that is today's Pearl Street Stories. So thank you very much for coming.